He was an ordinary boy. He did not have a big weapon, nor any gang or power, just a small printer and very sharp eyesight. And with the help of just these two things, he staged such a scheme that the whole Canadian economy trembled. He neither threatened anyone nor resorted to violence. His real weapon was a tremendous understanding of printing counterfeit notes. Gradually, he built such a strong network that it became hard to tell real from fake. Now the question arises, how did this boy who grew up in a small town near Windsor, Ontario, become such a big player and then fall? Today's story is the journey of that rise and fall, a person who shook the government's sleep by printing counterfeit notes. In fact, the story of counterfeit money is as old as real money itself. People began making counterfeit coins almost as soon as coins existed. It is believed this started around 600 BCE. Back then, people mixed cheaper metals to make fake gold and silver coins. Then came paper money, which first appeared in China in the 13th century, where notes were made from the wood of the honey locust tree. The government then strictly protected those trees, and anyone caught forging notes was punished by death. Yet the trade in counterfeit money did not stop. In the 18th and 19th centuries in England, people manufactured counterfeit notes and sold them wholesale. Many aristocrats living in London openly spent them. America did not escape either. Conditions there were so bad that a writer, John Neal, wrote that in the early 1800s, more than half of the notes circulating in America were counterfeit. Canada also had to fight this war, not only its own counterfeits, but counterfeit dollars that came from America and circulated openly here. Several gangs had established bases on the Canada-US border, for example in Ontario. In the 1990s, one name loomed largest, Joseph Baxarian. He alone produced so many counterfeit USD notes that their total value exceeded USD 24,000. Perhaps hearing such stories gave the boy from that small town the idea to take this path. So now the real question is, when did this boy named Vaisly enter this trade? Let's learn the story of his beginning. Vaisly Weber was born in 1974 in a small place called River Canna, which lies just below Windsor, Ontario. His childhood was perfectly normal. His parents loved him very much. They supported him in his studies as well. From childhood, Vaisly had a great interest in computers, and that very hobby would later change the direction of his entire life. When Vaisly became a teenager, he started having trouble mixing with the other kids at his school. He stayed a little quiet. An introvert type, he spoke little and lived in his own world. Gradually, all his friends began moving away from him. But computers became his true friend. He enjoyed coding and algorithms, as if they were another world where he could fully be himself. But this obsession increased the distance between him and others. The loneliness grew so much that to appear cool and get noticed, he hatched a strange plan with one of his friends. They thought, why not stage a theft at their own high school? The purpose of this plan was not only to make money. Actually, they wanted people to notice them, to take them seriously. But what they had imagined turned out to be even bigger. The theft occurred and newspapers published that some professional thieves from Detroit had come and stolen goods worth USD 70,000 from the school. No one knew the truth, but suddenly Vaisly was in everyone's eye. His popularity at school and outside skyrocketed. Perhaps for the first time he received the attention he had always sought. But this was the turning point from which his life's direction changed. Now Vaisly did not only want people's attention, now he wanted money too. A lot of money, and this desire gradually led him down a path of no easy return. Vaisly Weber did not start printing counterfeit notes all of a sudden. Before that, he had already become quite adept at forging documents. He began making government documents as well, like welfare cards, checks, insurance certificates, even gift vouchers. Because of these activities, he went to jail for the first time in 1997. He received a 3-month sentence, but for Vaisly this sentence was no big deal, because both his thinking and his planning were grand. Besides forged documents, he had also entered small-scale theft and drug businesses. He started growing marijuana but was caught. This time he did not go to jail, but he was placed under house arrest for 18 months and required to do 240 hours of community service. But neither jail nor house arrest stopped Vaisly. He wanted a big life, luxury, respect, and above all money. Then an idea came to his mind. Why not make counterfeit notes so convincing they looked like the real thing? Vaisly, who had played with computers and printers since childhood, was now going to use that very skill. But this time the target was large. Counterfeit USD bills. He had previously tried forging smaller notes like USD 10 and USD 20. But this time he entered the field with full seriousness. At first his forged notes were quite poor. Anyone could look and immediately tell they were fake. But Vaisly was not someone who gave up. He repeatedly compared real notes with his counterfeit ones. He identified every mistake and tried to fix it. Only then did he see two major shortcomings. First, under UV light the real notes did not glow, but his counterfeits would shine like a disco ball. Second, the lack of security foil. Real USD bills have tiny dots and shiny color-shifting foil which his counterfeit notes lacked. Now Vaisly understood that if he could fix these two weaknesses, the UV response and the security foil, his counterfeit notes could rival the real thing. Vaisly found solutions to those two big problems he had faced: UV light and security foil. How he did that we will see ahead. But one thing was certain. Now household printers and cheap materials would not suffice. So Vaisly decided he needed professional quality material. He began contacting every supplier in Canada and America who sold special paper, security foil, and special inks. After many weeks of research, trials, and failures, he finally obtained all the things he needed. Materials that could make counterfeit notes that looked like the real thing. Now Vaisly had high-quality paper, foil that resembled the real thing, and the right type of ink. But when it came to printing, he surprised everyone. He did not buy an expensive industrial machine. He chose the same ordinary printer that had been in his home all along. The reason was simple. He had tried many machines, but this small printer produced the best copies of USD notes. Now everything was ready. Only one step remained: to combine all the elements correctly and begin the final printing. But one new challenge arose here. The scale at which Vaisly wanted to print notes was not a task for a single person. He needed a trusted professional team who could run the whole operation with him. That is when he chose 3 associates he could fully rely on. The 4 of them together formed a team in which each member had a specific role, and everyone took their work extremely seriously. The first associate was Dustin, whose responsibility was to fit optical security devices on the notes. This was the shiny strip that gives a bill its authentic look. The job demanded extreme precision and patience, because even a tiny mistake could ruin an entire note. The second was Ryan Hadar, whose job was to apply a clear coat on the notes. This coating sealed the ink, making the counterfeit note feel like the real thing to the touch and helping it last longer. The third was Anthony Gabriel, who acted as the team's coordinator. He supervised every step, ensured work was done on time, and was responsible for keeping the whole system running smoothly. Now Vaisly was no longer just a lone hacker or skimmer. He had become the leader of a full team running a network aimed at shaking Canada's economy from the inside, without picking up a weapon. The 3 members of the team were so synchronized and efficient at their jobs, that the counterfeit USD notes they produced were considered the most advanced and dangerous Canada had ever seen. But while it looked easy from the outside, the work was every bit as difficult as it appeared. By then all the materials had been procured. Vaisly had a reliable team. The real test was about to begin. That was the moment the foundation was laid for one of the most notorious white-collar crimes in Canadian history. Vaisly and his team began designing the full template for the USD note. They replicated the front and back so meticulously that every detail looked original. The team knew that even a small slip would cause the entire operation to fail and increase the risk of capture. Making a counterfeit USD was an immensely complex task. It had to be convincing whether casually seen in a supermarket or examined by a bank's advanced machines. Vaisly and his team understood this challenge well, so they worked on the tiniest details. They repeatedly adjusted the note's brightness, sharpness, saturation, and color. The images printed on the notes were fine-tuned again and again. After many sleepless nights and countless trials, they finally succeeded in creating a template that was, at first glance, nearly impossible to distinguish from a genuine USD. Most people would have stopped there, but Vaisly was different. He was a perfectionist. For him, the work was not finished until every detail was flawless. That perfectionist habit led him to tackle the final deficiency that still remained in their counterfeit note. Genuine USD notes contained an optical security device, a special color-shifting foil that appears different when viewed from different angles. Replicating this feature on their counterfeits was the greatest challenge. The team knew well that if they could not copy it, all their notes would be detected and the entire operation would collapse. But the problem was that Vaisly could not openly ask anyone for help because what he was doing was completely illegal. Thus, the responsibility for solving this issue fell solely on Vaisly and his team. To solve the problem, they most crucially needed the right material. He approached many foil manufacturing companies, posing as the CEO of a company called Pro Custom Graft. Thanks to his charm and convincing presentation, he finally obtained the material he had been searching for. But the real challenge did not end there. They now needed to use that foil to create a security feature that looked exactly like the real U. Vaisly wanted the counterfeit business to be absolutely flawless, and in the end he found a solution for this problem as well. His resourcefulness and cleverness astonished his teammates. They had never before seen anyone so easily balance between the legal and illegal world. These qualities made Vaisly the true mastermind of the whole team. By then every major obstacle had been resolved. The team was fully prepared, and real production began. They say greed has no limits. The same proved true for Vaisly and his companion. Days passed, and their greed continued to grow. They knew very well that the consequences of being caught would be severe. Yet despite that, they kept printing counterfeit notes on a massive scale. Initially their operation was small, but gradually it transformed into a fully organized enterprise. They upgraded their equipment and purchased new software to further improve the quality of their counterfeit notes. Their productivity increased dramatically. Within a few weeks the team could produce approximately USD 100,000 worth of counterfeit USD notes in a single run. For cutting the paper they used a hydraulic laser paper cutter, which made the note edges perfectly precise, so perfect that even trained eyes were deceived. But printing counterfeit notes alone did not suffice. The real test was to put these notes into circulation and have people accept them as genuine. That presented another challenge. Genuine notes wear down with circulation and begin to look used and old. Vaisly and his team's notes, however, looked brand new and shiny. If such notes were introduced directly into circulation, they would immediately arouse suspicion. Vaisly found a clever solution for this as well. They began placing freshly printed notes into a dryer along with clay poker chip. For about 11 minutes the notes and chips would tumble together, and when the notes emerged they showed slight wear. They then looked precisely like genuine, used notes. It was time to test these counterfeit notes in the market, and the results stunned the team. The notes were so perfectly made that no one suspected them. People accepted them as real currency without hesitation. Vaisly, Anthony, Dustin and Ryan felt as if they had discovered a limitless mountain of money. But that very belief in greed would gradually become their greatest problem. As the operation expanded, so did their expenses. The four began to live such lavish lives that they had never imagined before. Expensive cars, designer clothes and lavish spending. Their lifestyle made it obvious that they had suddenly come into great wealth. As the leader of the team, Vaisly led the charge in this extravagance. He became intoxicated by his new fortune and spent most of his time shopping. He had a particular fondness for luxury cars and bought several with his illegal earnings. His greatest pride was his favorite car, a Mustang Cobra. But buying the car was not enough. He wanted it customized with high-end modifications to make it the ultimate symbol of his success and status. That was where Vaisly made the mistake that would change his life. To get his preferred rims for the Mustang Cobra, he approached a dealer. When it came time to pay, Vaisly thought it would be a smart idea to use counterfeit notes. The dealer, however, began checking the notes and immediately became suspicious. The reason was clear. Several notes bore the same serial number. That moment shook the empire of counterfeit notes built by Vaisly Weber. The dealer promptly informed the authorities. He had no idea that his report would trigger an investigation into one of Canada's largest white-collar criminals. As soon as police and federal agencies received word of counterfeit notes with identical serial numbers, they sprang into action. This was such a major lead that law enforcement decided to move swiftly. Until then, Vaisly had always managed to evade the authority. But this single careless mistake weakened his entire operation. The agencies were now convinced they were on the right track. The next challenge was to gather solid evidence so that Vaisly and his entire team could be legally arrested. After that, the police began keeping 24-hour surveillance on Vaisly and his associates. Their every movement was tracked. The surveillance was so tight they felt as if every breath they took was being recorded. Gradually, Vaisly and his team realized they were being watched. Their behavior changed. They often drove carelessly, made sudden U-turns, and performed evasive maneuvers to foil the cars tailing them. To avoid electronic surveillance, they began changing their phone numbers frequently. Each of the four grew anxious about being caught, but Vaisly was the most terrified of all. Because of his previous experience in jail, he knew how harsh life inside prison could be and did not want to return. Still, the fear of arrest could not stop them. The demand for their counterfeit USD in the market remained so high that production continued. Their operation became so large and widespread that it seemed impossible to stop. This success filled Vaisly and his companions with overconfidence. They believed they were smarter than the police and would never be caught. On the other hand, law enforcement agencies were now fully prepared. After months of surveillance and evidence collection, they finally decided to launch a full-scale operation against Vaisly Weber and his team in October 2000. The timing was crucial because their production was at its peak. The team was printing counterfeit USD in quantities never seen before, and authorities feared that if they did not act immediately, the illegal empire would expand further and possibly get out of control. After gathering substantial evidence, the police and federal agencies obtained search warrants and reached the place where Vaisly his team was running their entire printing operation. Authorities were already tracking their every activity. Now the time had come to catch them red-handed. As soon as the officers entered that building, the scene before them was shocking. Fake notes were scattered all around the room, on the tables, on the machines, and literally all over the floor. Currency was spread everywhere. The total value of the counterfeit notes present inside was around 50. This was solid proof that Vaisly and his team were still deep in production at that very moment, and their business was running at full swing. But this sudden raid by the police completely shocked them. They had no idea that every activity of theirs was being closely monitored. They were so busy printing fake notes and lost in their luxurious lifestyle, that this sudden action caught them completely off guard. So much so that when the officers caught them, two of the team members still had gold paint on their hands, the paint that was part of their work. For the police, this raid was a complete success. They caught the accused at the very moment they were committing the crime. After months of effort and surveillance, this was a big victory for law enforcement officers. Vaisly and his team now had no way to escape. Police took them all into custody, and now they had to face the serious consequences of their actions. As the legal proceedings moved forward, one thing became increasingly clear. The roles of Ryan, Dustin, and Anthony were not as big as that of Vaisly. The real mastermind was him, the one who had built the entire empire of fake notes. This difference was also clearly seen at the time of sentencing. Anthony Gabriel, Ryan Huder, and Dustin were sentenced to 2 years in prison for the crime of printing counterfeit notes, whereas Vaisly Weber, who had laid the foundation of this entire operation, admitted his guilt and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Their arrest and sentencing were a strong message to all those involved in or thinking of entering the business of counterfeit currency. The arrest of Vaisly and his team ended one of the most organized counterfeit note-making operations in Canada's history. Authorities not only seized the fake notes, but also all the equipment and material that could have been used to produce millions of dollars more in the future. This illegal operation had caused deep damage to Canada's economy. The market was flooded with counterfeit notes, causing huge losses to small and large businesses, and even raising questions about the credibility of genuine currency. But despite going to jail, there was no significant change in Vaisly's mindset. His ambition remained the same. He still wanted to become rich, whether legally or illegally. After spending 5 years in prison, in August 2006, Vaisly Weber was released. As soon as he got out, he moved to the Richmond Hill area of Ontario to make a new start. In the beginning, he started selling phones. For someone who just a few years earlier had been printing counterfeit notes worth millions, this work may have seemed a little small and strange, but this was his first attempt after release. However, the phone business was not Vaisly's real intention. His true interest had always been in trading. While in prison, he had learned quite a lot about market trading. After moving to Ontario and spending some time selling phones, he started a consulting firm, Goldbridge Financial Incorporated. The strangest thing about this company was that it offered financial services, but it did not have any official registration. During this time, Vaisly also started a digital currency startup. He did not build this company alone. His wife Michelle Kam was its co-founder. The company was called Encryptex, and its aim was to provide people with a platform to store and trade digital crypto. But Vaisly knew that because of his past criminal record, it would be almost impossible for his company to get listed on any public exchange and raise money from investors. So he came up with a new way. He changed his identity and tried to list the company under the name Vaisly. In 2011, the Ontario Securities Commission, OSC, discovered that Vaisly was involved in unregistered investment advising and illegal stock trading. Both of these activities were against the law. The OSC clearly stated that Vaisly was already under a trading ban, but he broke that rule. In the end, Vaisly admitted his mistake. In 2011, an Ontario court judge sentenced him to 90 days in jail and 2 years of probation. But Vaisly's story did not end there. In fact, when he was imprisoned for the crime of counterfeit notes, another case related to his early life had surfaced, the cultivation of marijuana. And after coming out of jail, he once again returned to that old path. The only difference was that earlier he had grown marijuana in the basement of his house, but in 2012 he started this work on another farmer's land. In 2017, Vaisly even appeared before Toronto's Licensing and Standards Committee to present his views on marijuana. But at that time he did not appear with his real identity. Instead, he used the alias Jeff Murray. He gave suggestions to the councillors on regulating cannabis stores, as if he were an ordinary business. A year later, in October 2018, when recreational marijuana was legalized under Canada's Cannabis Act, Vaisly immediately claimed that he had helped finance a cannabis store chain called CAFA. But later a CBC News investigation revealed the truth, that the chain he was talking about was actually his own. Vaisly himself was the founder and main owner of that chain, and his wife Michelle was working as the director of the company. Whether it was cannabis or counterfeit notes, the name of Vaisly Weber will always remain connected with the largest counterfeiting operations in Canada's history. His technical expertise, attention to small details, and perfectionist habit had once shaken Canada's economy. His counterfeit USD notes were so real that police training colleges began using them as examples to teach fraud and counterfeiting. Vaisly's story teaches us that intelligence, hard work, and dedication, if applied in the right direction, can achieve great success. But when those same qualities are used in crime, the result is always disastrous. Vaisly had the talent that could have made him a superstar in legal and noble work. But he chose shortcuts and the wrong path. His journey from an ordinary computer-obsessed boy to becoming Canada's biggest counterfeiter reminds us that the greed to get rich quickly blinds a person's thinking. And that very greed forces one to make decisions that change their entire life. The empire of Vaisly Weber and his team ultimately collapsed because they always wanted more. Vaisly's desire for a luxurious lifestyle made him careless, and that very carelessness paved the way for his arrest and downfall. This story clearly shows that the life of crime always ends with a heavy price. No matter how late, but the reckoning always comes. And this is how ends the story of Vaisly Weber: rise, glory, and finally downfall.